On this episode of Locked on Lightning, the Tampa Bay Lightning lose what I wish we could say was a close one up in Vancouver. We talk about the very unfortunate performance that was last night. Kucherov a no-show. The power play dries up. All that coming up more on Locked on Lightning.
You're Locked on Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Denker. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Locked On Lightning. And it's just as a reminder, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Today, we're talking about last night's loss. We're talking about the power play once again not showing up, as well as Nikita Kucherov, just very unsurprisingly absent from this game. We'll talk about that all coming up on today's show. But first, I just want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube, so subscribe to the channel there as well. Drop a comment below and hit the thumbs up button below this video. So last night, the Lightning go up against a very formidable team in the Vancouver Canucks. A game where, as I often do with these kind of games, I often have high expectations, especially when the Lightning have been playing well as they have, win or lose. And for the most part, early on, they did everything right. They go in, they outshoot Vancouver early on. They set the tone. They score a goal early on. Check off both those boxes, which is, very rare thing to say about this team at some point throughout the course of the season. But then the Lightning, unfortunately, let the game slip away from them as Vancouver goes on to score 3 unanswered goals, followed by a 4th empty netter. And when you look at this game, I mean, the thing that you gotta kind of look at and say why it went wrong, and it wasn't exactly a game where I thought the Lightning made a lot of mistakes, and that's what contributed. It was more so that Vancouver also came out, played a very, very clean game for the most part. And I say clean as in they didn't give up too much in terms of making mistakes or really allowing the Lightning to really get an edge, except for obviously that first goal early on. And the Lightning weren't able to kind of really pick themselves back up from that. What we've seen in past games with this team is that they've gone out, they've done little things. And I will say to a certain extent, and that this team played well last night. It seems as though in this game that they just couldn't turn it up to another notch. But Vancouver really, really was the better team last night. And as often is the case with the Lightning thus far this year, is that they are unable to really just collapse the pressure on top of a very good goaltender. And in this case, that was Thatcher Demko. We saw it in the game against the Predators, against UC Soros. So I think that really when we're looking at this game and we're kind of trying to identify a trend with Tampa Bay right now, as we often try to do with this team, because I feel like at this certain point, this doesn't take anything away from, I think, what the Lightning have accomplished in their last couple of weeks of play. I think that really what it comes down to when you're looking at trends and you're looking at what kind of team you're going to have for the rest of the year, I think we could say with optimism or some sort of positivity, because at least now we know what kind of is the issue. And this may change later on as Vasilevsky gets more acclimated. I think really what it comes down to is that this team is just not good enough to where they could win the goalie games. And, I don't take that as a bad thing because really when you look at it and you look at their schedule for the rest of the year, I mean, really out of all the teams that they may be playing, whether it be one more time or two more times or whatever the case may be, you really look at the rest of the teams that they're playing for the rest of the year. I mean, really, how many other teams have goaltenders that are in that elite category? We've already stated one we've already talked about one with UC Soros, Thatcher Demko last night. The other one that comes to mind that the Lightning fell short against was Connor Hellebuyck. That's another one. And you really look around the league, and other than the one that you got in net for yourself, there's really not much around there that really jumps out at you. I mean, Boston and Swayman, if you really want to make a case for that, they got the Rangers coming up next week with Shesterkin, who's been struggling this year. So, on one side of that, you kind of look at that and say, well, hopefully they don't play Quick, because Quick's been playing very well this season as a backup. But, as much as it's disappointing to see the Lightning going into a game like this, where really for the most part, they were either in front in a lot of categories or just, kind of toe to toe with them, with the Canucks. It was a game where the Canucks didn't really do too much. And like I said, this was really a goaltender's game. I also don't think it was just, I think it was a combination of things other than the fact that you had a very good goaltender in that. I think it was that this team was playing within their game, which is really nice to see. You look at the stats, they had 29 shots on goal last night, as opposed to Vancouver's 22. So when you see 3 goals come out of that, and then eventually you only get 1 from the 29, that could be a little frustrating and maybe a little deflating for this game, for this team. And then on the other side of that, you look at down the box score, you got the face-off percentage. The Lightning only edge out the Canucks by an extra 2%. They had 51%, where the Canucks had 49. But the thing that really sticks out, and we'll get to that a little later on, is the power play. The power play did not show up in this one in the 3 chances that they had. They weren't even able to get 1. And that was something that we saw in the previous game. And, how you want to feel about that with Seattle, I still feel like, even though they won that game, I think I kind of alluded to it in the time that really you still want to get that scoring on the power play going, even though, you may win the game or lose the game. If the Lightning are able to score on the power play, they give themselves sort of a chance in the game, because as we all know, they do struggle somewhat on even strength for whatever reason, honestly, to get things going. And that's kind of a conversation that we could have a little bit more down the line, I think, as we get closer to the trade deadline, because I think that really that's going to be something that the Lightning are going to be looking at as we get ever closer to that intense NHL trade deadline. What piece that they might have to pick up, whether it be defensively or, now that they look at the even strength issues here and there, maybe they might go after a forward, but that all remains to be determined. A lot can change from now until then. But yeah, this was a game, like I said, just to reiterate, I thought that, the Lightning didn't play particularly well. It wasn't like anything really jumped off to me. They just did kind of what they needed to do within the realm of what they are capable of. And they just happened to run into a team who is one of the top 5 teams in the league, in my opinion, a team that many view as a legitimate cup contender. So, that's really all there is to it. And it's unfortunate that the Lightning weren't able to pick up a consecutive win, given that they are now have to have the tall task of going into a game now in Edmonton and having to face off against Connor McDavid. So we'll just hope that they could pick up the pieces from here, because as we all know with this Lightning team, sometimes if they play a game like this and they get super frustrated, it could kind of start the beginning of kind of like a dry spell for this offense and for this team to, maybe hopefully not, but go on a couple of games without winning a game or even picking up a point. So we'll hope for the opposite of that. But coming up, We'll talk more about the power play struggles. Should we be alarmed? That's 2 games in a row without a power play goal. And then a little bit later on to wrap things up, we'll be talking about Kucherov, a non-offensive no-show from last night's game with 0 shots on net. So we'll talk about that in just a bit. But first, I want to talk about one of our sponsors on today's show, and that is our friends over at Game Time. Now, if you haven't heard about Game Time, listen up closely, because this might determine whether or not you get a great gift for someone or an awesome gift for someone. So listen, Game Time is one of the best apps to buy tickets for any event out there, whether it be comedy, theater, sporting events, you name it, they sell tickets for it. You shouldn't have to worry, especially with the holidays around, that when buying tickets to your next big event, Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you, with killer last-minute deals and all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. See the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. The days of arriving at your seat after blindly buying tickets and sitting behind an obstructed view are over. All-in prices show your total up front, so you know what you're getting. A great deal without hidden fees. Buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL, LOCKEDONNHL, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So as always, I want to thank everybody for making us your first listen on the show. Remember, you are listening to Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That is every day we'll be coming to you with the latest news and analysis of Lightning performances, as well as, like I said, any news that may surround this team, especially as the trade deadline is coming ever nearer. I think that this year we might see the Lightning pull the trigger a little faster on a potential deal than what they did last year, where I think the Jeannot trade, I believe, was the day before the deadline, if not the day of. But it was like almost the 11th hour, if I remember correctly. But anyway, I think the Lightning are definitely going to pull the trigger. For what exactly, that remains to be determined, because, the Lightning are still kind of figuring it out, even though I feel like on some nights, more nights than most, recently, this team is kind of shaping into the team that we will see for the rest of the year in terms of play. So last night was positive because, what you see kind of now out of this team, minus a couple of things that we will be addressing throughout the remainder of this episode, is what you kind of get from this team. But last night, the concerning thing was really just the power play, not scoring. And I spoke about it on the previous episode, how, yes, that they were able to get away with it in their game against Seattle because just they won the game. So, not scoring on the power play is not as glaring of something that, you may not realize, as opposed to when you lose a game, such as the one you did last night, where in reality, I mean, like I've always said, if you've been a listener of this show, I do not really look at empty net goals as like legitimate goals. So in my mind, I look at this game as the Lightning losing 3-1. And when you've not scored on 3 power play chances, as the Lightning did last night, losing by a 2-goal margin really is kind of glaring, because the Lightning do have the talent. They do have the weapons to go out there and be somewhat successful. They're one of the top teams in the league, at least coming into this game, of scoring on the power play. And it kind of is frustrating, as we've all all lovingly found out over the last couple of years, when this team underperforms in certain things that we all know that they're one of the best, if not the best, at. And so when they come into a game like this and they don't score, and especially when they just struggle immensely on the even strength, it just makes that a whole lot worse. And really, it's frustrating. Yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged sword with this team, with the power play, as well as the really the even strength, because it's, you know, you kind of almost have to, I think, with this team, you almost have to hope, or at least, kind of, it makes the let me put it this way. It almost makes the pressure of having to score on the power play that much more higher, because of just how ineffective they've really been on the 5-on-5. And it really is a little bit concerning. And it's one of those things where they really don't have a choice but to. So, I'm sure, and I'll tally it and probably bring it up tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. But I'm very curious as to what the Lightning record is when they do score on the power play, as opposed to when they don't score a power play goal in a game, regardless of how many chances they get. Um, but yeah, that is very something that is very concerning to me, and should be concerning to a lot of Lightning fans, because when you look at this team, and they very heavily rely on their power play goals, it is very concerning, and it's something that, yes, you are, that most more than likely, as I've always spoken about, and I spoke about yesterday, that, this team, you definitely want to see them play with a sense of things, of how they're going to play in the playoffs, in a potential playoff series. And as much as, yes, you're going to get calls in the playoffs, you're going to be on the power play. There are situations, and we have seen it explicitly with this Lightning team, where whether it be the playoffs or even the regular season, where they just don't draw a penalty. And that makes the prospect of them having to play 5-on-5 hockey, at least offensively, for an entirety of a game, that even scarier. And yes, they did score a goal on the even strength to open up the game last night, and that was a great passing sequence that ended up in a Braden Point goal. But at the same time, it needs to happen more consistently. And obviously, there are a lot of more things that we'll get into at the end of this show, especially with Nikita Kucherov, is, the reason why, kind of what he didn't do last night, really is really a big contribution to why this team wasn't successful on the power play. But when you look at the power play, really, I mean, you have a lot of guys that could do really kind of take control. If you take Kucherov out of that equation, and yes, at the same time, the Lightning were also without Victor Hedman last night, so that kind of threw a wrench in maybe some of the plans or the regular chemistry that we might see with this team. But then again, these guys practice with a lot of each other on the power play, so they should at least be somewhat used to playing with each other, especially when they're a man up. And it's just an issue that needs to be resolved within the next couple of weeks, because we really shouldn't be sitting here, especially 2 nights in a row, talking about how the Lightning are unable to score power play goals, because that is a huge part of their game. They've shown it by being one in, I believe, still even today, in the top 2 for power play goals, power play success in the league. So they need to figure it out. I mean, you look at the first power play unit: Paul, Point, Cooch, Stamkos, and Sergachev. And we all know that Sergachev is able to sling it around and do what and be able to quarterback a power play. And you have a bunch of experienced guys. You got Cooch there. We all know what Point could do. Paul is just a Swiss Army knife. He's one of those guys where he's just a chameleon. He could just roll with it in any situation. And Stamkos, we kind of already know what's going to happen with Stamkos at this point, especially on the power play. He's going to sit there. He's going to sit there, and he's just going to wait for the puck to come to him. And yeah, he will rotate into the slot at some point, but still, we kind of know what's going on there with him. And then you look at the other power play unit. You got Sorelli, ABB, Hagel, and Radish. Not bad. I mean, you got Hagel there. Jeannot is competent with passing, as we all know, and finding the open man and creating opportunities for his teammates. And Sorelli is a vet. So we kind of, it upsets me, because, I think this game would have been a whole lot different if the Lightning at least go 1 for 3. The momentum and energy would have kind of been flipped in their favor at any point in those power plays. But at the same time, you got guys that know how to run a power play there and know how and what to do to get things going on the power play. So it's really something that needs to kind of get sorted out ASAP, especially in the next couple of weeks with some of the teams that you'll be facing. We got Edmonton tomorrow, Calgary over the weekend, and then you got a couple of good teams in the next couple of weeks, including one of the top teams in the Metro who looks like they're coming down to earth, the New York Rangers. So, that's a big game for the Lightning. It's got to start with their success on the power play. So let me know in the comments below what you think about that. Is this just a blip for them? And I feel like we could kind of chalk this up as kind of, at least last night's game is all right. They were without Hedman and it kind of messed things up because we know Hedman being on the first power play is a huge part of the success for that team. So, maybe it's just a fluke. And then once he's back, we could hope to see more continued success on the power play. So in just a little bit, we'll be talking about Kucherov's performance last night. Is this the start of him coming back down to earth, or maybe another contribution as to why Hedman being out, a very good team ahead in front of you. We'll talk about that in just a little bit coming up. But first, let's talk about our last sponsors of the day, and that is our friends over at the Sleeper app. Now, listen up. A new NHL season brings all sorts of possibilities. Kucherov could score 50 goals, and the Lightning could hoist the Stanley Cup. And you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our #1 choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. Now, I think it's always a safe bet to always bet on Cooch, always bet on Hagel, always bet on guys like Paul Sorelli, who are going to be down low, get you the easy points on any given sequence. And all you have to do to win some serious money, people, is to pick 2 to 3 players on your team. So it could be Cooch, it could be Sorelli, it could be Paul. You could interchange any of those guys that I just brought in there, put 2, and you could pick them to record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in a given game. So to win 100 times a bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Lightning fans. You could win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you could start winning big. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. So wrapping things up on the show, I just want to remind you always to subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed. And I also want to just thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And like I said, subscribe to the podcast on any audio platform as well as on our YouTube channel. If you want to get in on the action and in the discussion, go ahead and drop a comment below this video on YouTube and join the conversation and hit the thumbs up button. So people who are not subscribed to the podcast, the algorithm will meet them, will find them, and they could jump in and listen as well as watch the podcast. So last night, we already talked about certain things, the power play issues, and just not a game where I was particularly very upset. I mean, like I said, I will be the first to admit when an opposing team is good and they're just better. And last night the Canucks were better, but like I also said, when you look at the box score and you don't see any power play goals, you don't see Nikita Kucherov, who we could all agree at this point in time is the best player on the team and the best player in the league. And I will still feel that way until he is completely surpassed in all scoring categories. But the thing that is really distressing to me, and like I said, it could just be a one night thing, but really with him, we can't afford to have this be an occurrence on any night, is that he did not have any shots on net. He didn't have any points. He had a plus minus of -1. And it wasn't like he left early with an injury. The guy played close to 27 minutes, a little over 26, let's say that. And that's the thing that kind of pisses me off to a certain extent with Kucherov. And I'm sure a lot of Lightning fans, because we've talked about so much with him, how involved he is and with the success of this team. And really, he's the reason why this team at times is very successful. I mean, we've seen it over the last couple of weeks and pretty much the entire year. He's had his fingerprints over pretty much every Lightning win this season for the most part. And even if he hasn't scored a goal in a game, he's at least made a pass that has led to a scoring chance that has resulted ultimately in a goal. But the issue that really kind of has been following him over the last couple of years is that you'll have these performances that are great. He'll go out there and impress us again with something that we feel like we've never seen from him. But then he'll follow that up or at some point have a game where he's just a non-factor. And when that happens, that is a huge issue for me. And it should be a huge issue for every Lightning fan, because when your best player doesn't have ultimately any effect on the game, especially when they are at that current time one of the best players in the league, it's kind of a thing that should really burn you up. Because, I hate to play this game with him, but I also, to be the best, you kind of have to compare yourself to the best. And I kind of like to compare him to some of the other players in the league. And, the Connor McDavids, the Nathan McKinnons, the Cal McCarrs, pick great player X on player team X or whatever. It is very few, especially with the elites, with the McDavids and the McKinnons and the McCarrs. You look at those guys, and you probably, at least I ask myself when I'm comparing him to those guys, Kucherov to those guys, I ask myself, how many games does Connor McDavid or Nathan McKinnon go or have where they are just the complete non-factor when they are 100% healthy, when they play over 26 minutes? How many games a year do they have those? And I don't have the exact number in front of me, but if I had to guess collectively between those two, they probably have maybe like 5 total between them. Whereas we've seen over the last couple of years with Coach, it happens probably 5 or 6. I think we could say, and that's a huge issue for me, because we've seen it in other games where against lesser foes, his team is not performing up to where I bet they want to or he wants to. And he kind of knows at this point, I think, that he is the flint that gets the fire started for this team. And to a certain, and we've seen him in other situations where he's just firing the puck madly at the net, just trying to get things started. And that's great. You know what? Especially when this team is playing against another team that is clearly better for them, and he's doing that. I don't have a problem with that, especially early on, because it sets a tone for the opposing team. And I think it opens everything up for this Lightning team. But what we saw last night eventually against a very good team that I just have to continue to reiterate, because the Canucks are, when he doesn't have that, when he's not tallying those numbers, it really gravely exposes the rest of this team. And it makes me, and I hinted at this before, it kind of makes me think that the Lightning need to figure something out with their forward depth very quickly. Because if you've looked at down the line, we've sparingly gotten production from guys in the lower parts of this team. Cirelli's played well, but not to the point to where this team could really live on that consistently if Cooch isn't showing up. Hagel, the same thing. He's having a good year. His numbers on paper are looking good when the Lightning are playing well, but when you look at this team, for example, last night losing 4-1, and especially if you take Kucherov completely out of the equation, which knock on wood, hopefully that doesn't happen, but that is something that could possibly happen given Kucherov's injury history. It's very concerning for this Lightning team when that happens. And it might, I think, if we continue to see losses like this for this reason, I would imagine Julian Brisebois is going to try and figure something out sooner rather than later to pick up a piece that could consistently score. Because if you look at the rest of the team, and I know he's been hurt for a while, but Tyler Mott has just been really a disappointment thus far this year. I kind of thought that we were going to get a little bit more scoring out of him this season. And, really he's just been a non-factor on that fourth line. I mean, he has 1 point this year. And, that's not really something that is going to help this team, especially when you come in as a free agent. But they're going to need to get more production all around. Cooch is going to need to show up every night. I know that's going to eventually wear him out, but that's just something that he's just going to have to do on a nightly basis. So do I think that maybe he's coming back down to earth? No, I think that we're going to see him bounce right back tomorrow night against the Edmonton Oilers. But that also, this team's going to need to bounce back, and it's really going to be dependent on, how their special teams does. How does 86 do? And of course, as always with this team, how Andrei Vasilevsky plays. So let me know in the comments below what you think about this game. Are any of, the power play struggles, the Kucherov struggles, should we overreact? Should we underreact? Where do I lie in between? How do you feel? And go ahead, subscribe to the channel as always. Subscribe to us on an audio-based channel as platform as always, if you wish to listen to us in that way. And we'll be back tomorrow to talk about the Edmonton Oilers as well as what that game entails for this Tampa Bay Lightning team as well. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.